Recording in progress. I can't hear you, Claire, but I'm just, if you wave at me, then I'll start talking. Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah, thanks. So thanks for having me along. I'm Josh Appignanesi. Yeah, I'm a filmmaker. I work in both fiction and documentary, and I also teach. I'm an associate professor at Southampton Uni teaching film. And I guess you could say once or twice I've made films that touch directly or indirectly on the subject of the Holocaust. I guess I'll speak mostly today as a filmmaker, anxious about these questions and the question of how to represent what has been called the unrepresentable, which is maybe something particularly vexed when it comes to film, maybe because of film's unarguable kind of visual concreteness, and also because of its tendency to glamorize, which is a tendency that perhaps is not entirely possible to circumvent. So, on that note, I should first say that this film worked brilliantly, spectacularly well for me. I mean, I sort of loved it, if you like. And so even if the word spectacular immediately reintroduces the problem here, right? Like everything becomes spectacle on the screen. Perhaps, more generously, we might see the film Zone of Interest as a pair of spectacles or lenses with which to see something that is actually very hard to see, the Holocaust. Not just because it's so horrible to look directly at, but because it is a kind of blur, a massively overwritten and overdetermined set of traumatic historical circumstances that are very liable to double vision and to projection and other such cinematic terms. I imagine many of us will agree about what the film does so well and how it does it. I suppose on the one hand, you have this fairly radical degree of visual distanciation. For example, there's a total lack of close-ups. We also don't see inside the camp. The close-up is normally the filmmaker's royal road to creating identification with the character's dilemma, to put us in their shoes, make us feel with them from their position and feel for them. And we can well understand why Mr. Glazer would want to avoid that. On the other hand, while avoiding these visual approaches, it's ramming the sound in our faces, the horrific, endless sounds of vicious, industrialized murder, so terrifyingly achieved and sort of more or less unceasing in those scenes, at least. So that the discrepancy between what we see and what we hear does the film's essential piece of work, which is to kind of enact correctly that which is constantly being denied or ignored, and to show how denial functions basically at some level, or sort of enacting it. And I suppose the other master stroke, I think, is the design of it, which literally enacts a moral architecture of denial to actually go ahead and build essentially the commandant's bourgeois home as it was on the actual corner of the actual Auschwitz death camp, which even taken alone as a thing to do would be like a brilliant artwork, even if it weren't like just a step in making this film. So, taken all together, and a wealth of other details and plot points and so on, what we have here, at least for me, is the most successful example of a fictional depiction of the Holocaust ever attempted, which is, I guess, quite a big thing to say. Maybe I'll change my mind, but at the moment, I really feel that. And of course, saying what a great film, is kind of a problem, right? We shouldn't really be put in a position to say, oh, this Holocaust movie was so great, so well shot, so cleverly edited, brilliant filmmaking, great acting. P.S. It's about, when they gassed 6 million Jews and a whole bunch of other people and then burned their corpses on an industrial scale. Like, you don't really want to put those two registers together at all, really. And yet, on the other hand, I sort of believe we have to. And even though, personally, certain films about the Holocaust that might stick in my throat, like, but without them, so without a Schindler's List or A Life is Beautiful, many audiences would have literally no sense of the Holocaust taking place whatsoever. So, there are many avenues and constituencies for memorialization. And I don't think purism is super helpful, even though I am for myself a purist. And Jonathan Glazer's film really speaks to me in that way. I think what also adds, or let's say even excuses this film morally, or elevates this film morally, if you like, through this problematic, is that it succeeds in making us the protagonists, you know, the Nazi, because it is beyond being a Holocaust film. It is a film about all of our denial all of the time in general. And I guess you could say more precisely, it, you know, it takes the Holocaust as a kind of almost primordial example of destructive denialism and humanity's excessive capacity for that as a leaping off point for a film that isn't reducible to Auschwitz, which to me is good. And it's like an act of survival in a way, to be able to do that in art. So, you know, we see this film and recognize we're all potentially Nazis who refuse to hear our complicity in the murder that's screaming at us in our nice bourgeois lives. And while it's quite obvious that there are all kinds of wars going on around the world and all kinds of murders, and some which have a direct historical connection to the Holocaust itself, and about which it's quite tempting to make some interpretations or statements at the moment, I'd put the accent today, for what it's worth, on what for me personally feels like the greatest challenge in terms of our capacity to deny and, you know, potential for mass death, which is actually that around climate. Maybe this is just me, but I took this film as also being a film about climate denialism, basically, like as a piece of climate storytelling about what nobody wants to hear. And I mean, hopefully you can see why I felt that, and if not, I'd be happy to expand. If I can just conclude with a thought that came from Devorah Baum, who watched the film with me, professor at Southampton. A final thing here about how the film details the experience of what psychoanalysts call splitting off. So, you know, splitting off, we could say, is at the root of all otherings and racisms. It's when we sort of enact this denial of the bits of ourselves we don't like, or we disavow or refute those parts of ourselves, and then we sort of place them somewhere else. We put them in something external, like usually other people, maybe Jews or something, and we blame them and tarnish those people for and with these qualities we dislike and want to get rid of, often very violently. So in this portrait of splitting off, which is something that none of us are immune to, okay, we're given a woman, and she's an ambitious bourgeois matriarch who sticks up for her quality of life, stands up to her husband, thinks about the well-being of her children, someone we might applaud or identify with in different circumstances. And this woman, of course, may not only be ignoring and denying the vicious murder and genocide on her doorstep, but in fact, perhaps enjoying it. She's feeling like, oh, I'm in the right place for me, and those others down there who are, you know, in hell over there, literally in hell, deserve it. And the more they suffer, the better it makes me feel, and the safer it makes me feel. And she actually, in the plot, wants to stay near hell, not in it, but near it, for those kinds of reasons, perhaps. So you know, that is, you know, we sometimes even exult in that denial, in that hearing but not hearing. I think we can take pleasure in suffering, even though, of course, we would disavow that in polite society. And for me today, that means climate above all, because of all the horrific and impending injustices going on right now. That, I feel, is the one that will undo us all completely. And I think we're all thinking, maybe if what we've said has some truth, then we might all be thinking at some level, even if it's not the only thing we're thinking, let those other fuckers burn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josh. We'll continue with Emily.
Yeah,
please.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear her in Zoom? Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And just to check whether I have 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'll try not to rehash too much of what Josh has already said so brilliantly, but I'm going to kind of couch some of my comments in relation to my own research. So my current research deals, as Claire said earlier, with the kind of mutual influence of horror and Holocaust aesthetics within 20th and 21st century film. And so I'm particularly interested in the ways in which Glazer's movie deals with the following paradigms, all of which I think are central to the narrativization of horror. So imagine violence, the production of suspense through sound, and the eliciting of fear and other embodied feelings in viewers. So I'm going to reflect very briefly on some of these paradigms within the zone of interest, and the ways in which they set the film apart from other cinematic Holocaust narratives, For the film entails a kind of a refutation of the kind of sentimentality with which the Holocaust is treated within the kinds of Hollywood Holocaust films that Josh has mentioned already. So Spielberg's Schindler's List, Life is Beautiful, for example. These kinds of blockbuster Holocaust films often involve kind of sentimentalizing narratives which have wide appeal to viewing publics and entail some sense of narrative closure, I think. So what we get with the zone of interest then is something far more nuanced, more interesting, I think, and also more horrific. A film more akin to the kind of view of the Holocaust that's achieved in Laszlo Nemes's Hungarian film, Son of Saul. One of the most effective narrative techniques within that film, Son of Saul, is the camera's up-close tracking of the film's protagonist, a Hungarian Jewish Sonderkommando prisoner tasked with running a gas chamber at Auschwitz. This cinematographic choice means that viewers are constantly focused on the face of Saul in a way that is both humanizing and affording insight into his interior emotions and disturbingly claustrophobic, forcing viewers into proximity with his actions. The zone of interest opts for an entirely different approach to cinematographic storytelling, using multiple hidden surveillance cameras to create an effect the director describes as Big Brother in a Nazi house, rather than fixating on one particular character. While achieved differently, this gives viewers a no less claustrophobic perspective of the film's events, from which we cannot escape or withdraw, one in which we play the role of a kind of silent observer and are hence implicated within the daily running of the Höss household, as well as the administrative mechanisms of violence the film encircles. This technique also prevents the film from aestheticizing the lives of the perpetrators and co-perpetrators it depicts, and from giving us a sense of their psychic interiority in a way that Spielberg does, I think, with Anna Gott, for instance. As Glazer puts it himself, he sought to remove the art of this and conventions of filmmaking that lead you down a road which don't feel relevant here, screen psychology. Instead, we observe the events and characters of the film with a degree of objectivity at a distance, enacting something of an anthropological gaze, as several critics have noted. So as silent observers or bystanders, viewing publics are thoroughly implicated alongside the film's perpetrators, rather than its victims, again, as Josh mentioned already. Another key way in which Glazer's film departs from conventional filmic representations of the Holocaust. Rather than encouraging viewers to identify and empathize with victims, the film places us in a more uncomfortable and complicitous position, side by side Höss, his wife, and other commandants, inviting us to relate to and reflect on what it is we share with them, whether our desires for domestic improvement or our capacities for violence. The zone of interest also departs from conventional filmic storytelling of the Holocaust in its approach to seeing and not seeing, knowing and not knowing, which keeps viewers firmly within a space of imagined violence in a way that coheres with one of the pivotal mechanisms of the horror genre. Horror films seek to thrill, frighten, and entertain viewers vicariously by creating a mediated experience of terror, and a principal means of creating such an experience is through forcing viewers to imagine violence. The idea here is simple, that whatever we imagine is far more terrifying than anything that can be shown on screen. In the context of Holocaust cinema, this approach to seeing or not seeing also avoids the ethical problem of redoubling genocidal violence via its representation on screen. The zone of interest activates this paradigm of horror cinema by refusing to directly depict Holocaust killing, invoking it through sound and hence forcing viewers to fill in the gaps and construct our own image of the events we hear but do not see. With this, the film resembles something of the approach to Holocaust violence again deployed by Son of Saul, in which we're not spared the sounds of the gassing operations, but most of the visual horrors surrounding Saul remain blurred and out of focus. The sounds of the concentration camp and death camp are relentless throughout the movie, throughout the zone of interest, serving as inescapable sonic reminders of torture and killing at all times. The sounds of trains, of fires, barking dogs, shouted orders, gunfire, and screams at once exist in the background of each scene, yet rupture the scenes of daily family life with which are presented. The extra diegetic sounds in the film are also masterful at creating sustained tension and suspense, another element shared with horror cinema. A particularly striking example of this is the droning sounds that accompany the film's nightmare-like sequences, showing a Polish girl leaving food for prisoners under the cover of darkness, which are deeply disturbing despite the act of compassion they portray. The first of these sequences takes place after Höss reads Hansel and Gretel to his children, a German fairy tale turned horror narrative which lends itself well to the Gothic imagery which follows. Taking place at night and shot in monochromatic infrared with a military camera, the black and white images in these sequences offer a dramatically different look to the film. The soundtrack in these sequences produces a discordant, guttural, and as David Herring observes, inhuman sound, as though we were entering another realm. We are implicated disconcertingly in the actions of the girl, which are not articulated through the kind of triumphant humanism with which viewers are encouraged to interpret heroic acts of rescue in Schindler's List and other movies. Rather vulnerable and alone at night, the girl's acts are overshadowed by a sense of impending dread, relating not only to her safety, but to that of the prisoners for whom she leaves apples. The use of colour signals another unusual way in which this Holocaust film crafts an off-kilter, suspenseful atmosphere. At times, the film's visual register feels sterile despite its immersive quality, owing in part to the absence of artificial light during filming and the metallic colour grading of the film, as well as the clinical gaze we are afforded throughout. However, there are specific moments in which colour is used to elevate the imagined horrors beyond the camp wall. One such moment occurs when the close-up of a flower in Hedwig's garden fades to the colour reds, which takes up the entire screen. In this moment, Herring observes, the sounds behind the wall increase and the soundtrack rumbles in and out as though stuck in the wrong gear. This experimental pause in the film's action signals one of two moments in Glazer's film, and in which he entrapped viewers within a space of horrific contemplation, the other being the opening sequence, which begins with a black screen and holds audiences in silence before the soundtrack is gradually introduced. The frozen, saturated red screen gives audiences time to connect the flower as a symbol of life to the ashes of Jewish victims which nurtured it, amplifying the sounds of a camp we are only too acutely aware of. This disturbing link between life and death is enacted elsewhere in the film, with images of verdant grass, undulating rivers, blue skies, and the sounds of nature indicating the animacy of the rural landscape and brushing up against the death and torture persisting within the camp perimeters. So to offer some kind of concluding thoughts here, and the film's biggest success for me is its fostering of feelings of discomfort, dread, and claustrophobia from beginning to end through the elements of cinematography and mise-en-scène I've discussed briefly here. Crucially, it does this while maintaining an awareness of the limits of representation and of the question of what we should or shouldn't show when it comes to the Holocaust. The film asks us to consider our own position to the violence it obscures from sight but not from sound, and to its memory in the present. The ending of the film enacts something of this reflection in a way that doesn't feel contrived, I don't think, showing workers cleaning the Memorial Museum on the contemporary site of Auschwitz, while its final return to the image of Höss resists narrative closure. Characterized by a contemporary aesthetic and as such possessing a radically different look from other Holocaust films, I think Glazer's work is truly unique in these ways.
Thank you very much, Emily. Emiliano?
Yeah, thank you. I'll just start by saying that I've seen the film once, as many have, and I'm enjoying the fact that it feels a bit like the old school of kind of where before the days of streaming platforms where one could watch the film many times before engage with it, and so there's and I would say something towards the end about the sort of reading the reviews, some creative readings, potential misreadings, potential misrememberings of the film that are, I think, more constructive in themselves. And it's a bit exciting to be in this space where we are all reacting to a film that is really struck remaining. And we are in the early days of the reception, and we are collectively kind of thinking about it, and it is an exciting time. I won't repeat the points already made. It's a film that is hard to situate within the historiography on Holocaust. Sorry, the filmography of the Holocaust, and that in itself is a it's an event that has represented many times, that has very established patterns of representation that can be also tried to the point of leading on to what was called compassion fatigue. So it is already remarkable the fact that it's not easy to situate the zone of interest within established filmography. Emily mentioned the Son of Saul, and quite rightly, if we want to situate the zone of interest, it needs to be in those kind of make canon of harsher Holocaust films that, whilst being very different, are like Son of Saul, among mainstream cinema. The Grey Zone could be another one. Very different films with zone of interest, but they feel that straight from the canon, as already mentioned, of Schindler's List, and it's beautiful. And this is already a remarkable achievement. And one point that we also mentioned is the fact that it's a film that is very conscious of the lengthy debate about the morality representation of the Holocaust, and it really takes a quite clear position. And in the film, the sound does much of the heavy lifting when it comes to the morality representation, because it's about 1 year rather than you see. So the film kind of skirts away from the issue of representing, and so in a sense we've come a long way from the discussions about the Jacques Rivette review of scaly review of Capot, the traveling at Capot, that set the scene for that type of debate. And again, it's remarkable the fact that there is this film has been made to this approach to the Holocaust and to the theme of the morality of representation. In terms of situating it, but even situating it within a broader cinematography about perpetrators of extreme political violence and genocide, it's not very easy to find films that are very similar to this. One needs to be mentioned, it has been mentioned because it's almost directly kind of referenced. The text of is the act of killing, the Josh Appignanesi documentary about now aging perpetrator of the Indonesian genocide, and completely reconstructed because it's in a context where the perpetrators have won. So the narrative about those events is very much about celebrating those acts rather than condemning them as a genocide. Long story short, there's a one sequence in which at some point the man in the act of killing his name is Anwar, as one of the kind of a moment of dry heaving and some sort of bodily response when confronted with the implications of his acts, and that sequence is directly referenced in a zone of interest in which there's this kind of bodily response and revulsion to what the rationally is ignoring. So another point I want to make is to kind of try and situate the film within kind of a sense of like the type of historiographical points that the film is making, because obviously any film is an historical film makes historiographical points, whether they are aware of it or not. I think with the zone of interest, there's a clear awareness of it, and in a sense, I would draw kind of the classic Robert Rosenstone, who says the kind of basically every historical film is an intervention in historiography. And this one is an intervention in historiography on the perpetrator and their motives and on degrees of implication and complicity. The one with Rudolf and the one is with Hedwig and the mother Lina. And now in the film, Rudolf doesn't. This is where I started by saying that I only saw once. Rudolf doesn't. I don't remember Rudolf displaying any particular prejudice. Whereas Hedwig and Lina do, quite clearly, though in a casual way. Rudolf is about being competent, about being efficient, about being a good organizer. So it's in a sense, as a perpetrator of Spree, is at the intersection between face-to-face killing, his day job that we don't see because it's left of Spree, and being a desk murderer, the part in when he's in Breslau and it takes part in kind of high-level meetings about the planning of a solution in Hungary.
Emiliano, speak louder.
So if I remember correctly, it never says anything about prisoners in particular. It never defines them. Perhaps once when he has a conversation about the ventilation, the more efficient ventilation system, they refer to them in terms of Stück pieces, which is the correct way in which the Nazis, the euphemistic language in which the Nazis talk about victims. So the closest ever gets to them, to define them, is this. So in a sense, we are allowed to think as viewers that to some extent it couldn't be anyone for him in the film. And that is perhaps confirmed by the fact that his confession to Hedwig on phone towards the end of the film, when he says, when he's at the party, and he said, like, I'm thinking about how to gas all the guests efficiently. So this is something that the film I think the message of the film conveys. And I think it's because he wants to make 2 points. One is, as Glazer often mentions, the film is about the present, and it's about the type of people that the Hösses are, their aspirations that are very kind of petit bourgeois, very middle class, very, in a sense, common and similar to those of the aspirations of many of us. Point number one. But also, I think he wants to make an historiographical point, and an historiographical point that is about a representation of perpetrators that is not, again, moves away from the cliche representation of the Nazis as crazy ideological barking orders, and there was a cliche in itself. And from this point of view, I think if I can compare it to a film, a very different film, but from this point of view, there's a similarity with Conspiracy. I don't know if you remember it, was this HBO BBC co-production in 2001 about the Wannsee conference, where starring Stanley Tucci as Eichmann and Kenneth Branagh as Hedwig, and they're similar because they both want to make the point, the historical point about the type of desk perpetrators, and in Conspiracy the point was about a more functionalist interpretation of the Holocaust, in which the final solution was part of a kind of excess power grab, a representation of the meeting that, in a sense, situated viewers, if you remember it, with the camera at eye level. So in a sense, the viewers were invited to sit and take part in this meeting, and it was very much presented as if it was almost like a normal meeting of a corporation with with Hedwig as the CEO, and the point was some of the values that these very educated men that put on screen, that we not associate with very successful people who are put in the service of the final solution. Here too, the values involving the Hösses in the film are put in the service of the final solution, and we as viewers are put in the position of seeing them clearly, perhaps recognizing some of those aspirations, and then be confronted with the fact that we are talking about what they do in the name of those values.
concluding remarks.
Yeah, so I conclude by saying that these are the main theoretical points I think the film wants to make. They might sacrifice a bit in terms of the actual historical record, because the Hösses were both much more anti-Semitic than, especially Rudolf, than we see in the film. But I think it's a compromise between historical record. Rudolf Höss joined the party in 1923, and his wife was also staunchly anti-Semitic. Compromise on historical record in order to make a broader historiographical point. And I think that is something that is very calculated by Glazer. And I stop here.
Thank you very much, Emiliano. Okay, now Drew.
Okay.
Project.
So, oh yes. So I think if you haven't seen the film, what you will have picked up so far is that sound is very important in the telling of the story and in the effect on the viewer. And it reminded me most, whilst watching it, of certain documentary styles, certainly the kinds of fly on the wall documentary styles that were sort of pioneered by the Males brothers. That there's literally just a soundscape, and there's no music to tell you what to think or how to feel about what's happening. And I think what's really interesting too is that that was Jonathan Glazer's original idea. Before he knew what he wanted to put on screen, he knew he wanted to make a movie about this time and place. He said in an interview, and he knew he wanted to. You could hear it, but you couldn't see it. But he didn't know what was going to happen on screen at that point. And then what's also interesting when you read about interviews with him and the sound designer Johnny Byrne about it, that when they first started doing it, it wasn't working until they really ramped up the sound design. Okay, so the sound design is hugely important. I mean, I think one of the panels already said shoved in our faces, rammed down our throats. The sound is very present. Although I should say, I mean, it's just inescapable. And it is exaggerated, but not to the point of parody or being unbelievable. I would say it's more hyper real, right? There's a certain hyper realness about the sound. And you know, for example, most films that we go and see are not realistic because they take out all background noise, right? Whereas if I stop talking, there's plenty of just noise in the room, right? We can hear humming and all the rest of it. And you know, the film just ramps up all of the background noise, okay? It becomes very audible. And it also borders, I think, this was mentioned at the start too, that along with documentary, that actually has reality TV moments. And I mean, I first noted that in the cutting, but it's also, that turns out to be how they filmed it, like they did put cameras around so that the actors could just get on with semi-improvising the scenes and making them as realistic as possible. And there's also, it's not a dialogue-heavy film. There are chunks of dialogue, and most of the dialogue-heavy scenes are not like, you know, they're in bed at night, for example, or you know, by the river, or later on when he takes his job away from the camp. But there, I mean, that's not to say there isn't dialogue. In fact, the one, this was the discussion we were having a little bit earlier. Oh no, sorry, I'll come to that in a second, sorry. And I also had a little bit of not dissociation, but we're all trained in how to watch certain kinds of film and television. And the idea that a sound that's not related to what you're seeing on screen might start, and you know that what's about to happen is a cut to another scene that sound belongs to. It's called a J cut, for example. And I found myself repeatedly, I'd hear a sound and I'd be like, oh, it's about to, and I would unconsciously think, oh, we're going to change the theme belt. It's like, no, that's just, that sound is just happening on the other side of the wall, right? It's just happening in this other reality. So it actually kind of, you learn how to watch the film as well as you're watching it. I won't talk about the score just yet, I'll sort of come back to the end. But so how sound perception works is that we can hear in all directions at once, right? That might seem obvious, but if you stop and think about it, maybe you've never stopped and thought about that before. But you can tell when a sound is behind you. You can tell when something's to the side of you or above you. And our eyes don't work that way, right? As soon as I put my hand in front of my mouth, you can't see my mouth anymore. right? You can still hear what I'm saying. In fact, you can hear that there's something in the way. And so there's very, very detailed sound design to recreate the sound of, it's not just that there are the sounds of violence or industrial scale murder or animals, dogs barking, mechanical gunfire, engines, that sort of thing. It's also that they've been placed so that you kind of know where they are. You know that they're a certain distance away, or that they're, oh my God, they're just on the other side of the wall. And which is a whole level of depth. I want to say dimension, but I mean that in terms of three-dimensionality. Or there's a three-dimensionality to the sound that is often not done in film because it would be distracting because there are so many other things going on. We sort of, if you like, we sort of downsample the sound as it would really be to make it legible in a film. And so they've done also this acoustic modeling, but I thought it was really interesting. I was expecting the film to be in surround, to feel very immersed in that world, but in fact it's in mono. And I remember sort of sitting there, and when I sort of did some research afterwards, we found that there was a conscious choice. They had done a surround mix, and it made it too. I'm going to paraphrase here because I can't remember what they said. It was like it was too lush, it was too cinematic. They wanted to make it sound more like, I think the phrase was a document. So it's a kind of a distancing technique to put it in mono, not even in stereo. The sound is just coming from the middle of the screen. We could talk about how that works historically as well, but in terms of the technology. But it actually sort of just had this function of distancing you from the film a little bit, as opposed to immersing you in it in the way that you would. And there's also something I want to mention about. And this is the other thing. So they used field recordings that were made in real spaces in the vicinity. They couldn't record a real incinerator that sounded exactly like the one, so they sampled them. They used various sound design techniques to make them sound like they were, ones operating in 1940, etc. But there's also a scene where, well, there's many scenes in the garden where there's a pool party, and the sound is because there's a wall. And the sound of the pool party is bouncing off the wall, which creates a very nasty sound, which sound designers tend to try to avoid as much as possible. Sound designers spend hours removing that kind of thing from a recording, right, in a film. But here it's kind of like you're very conscious of the sound bouncing off the wall and back at you, right? And there's two things about that. One is that the wall becomes even more physically present to us, not just a visual thing in the background, but we can hear the wall very clearly. But then you have the sudden realization that, oh, just as we can hear the gunshots and the murder on the other side of the wall, they can hear us having a pool party. So there's a very interesting moment. And there's also in the garden, well, what I'm about to say, so the idea is that the ear hears, but the brain listens, all right? And we can choose what to focus on. So the brain will automatically block out elements not considered important or new. So I'm currently speaking loudly, I'm trying to modulate my voice, I'm putting gaps in. It's constantly changing, and so you're focused on it, and you're not listening to the hum in the background or not so distracted by someone shifting in their seats. So we have that capacity, and sometimes that takes quite a lot of energy. And I think one of the interesting things about the characters who are clearly blocking out these sounds, it must take a lot of psychic energy, a lot of mental energy to do that. And we talk about dissociation. I mean, the character who is most notably dissociating is Hedwig, the wife. Because she knows exactly what's going on the other side of the wall. Some of the comments that she makes, some of that, asking her husband to look for certain things in the personal possessions that she wants, are, absolutely chilling. But her mother comes to visit. You've mentioned Lena comes to visit, and I read the film as Lena is visibly disturbed by the sounds on the other side of the wall. She's walking around going, "You've landed on your feet. You've got this huge house. You've got this great garden. You've got this. Oh man, you are doing so well." And then she's like, and Hedwig's just like completely oblivious to the sounds, but she keeps the mother keeps stopping, and there's gunfire or there's dogs barking, and you can see her, and the mother leaves. We don't understand why she leaves a note, but Hedwig's not happy, and you assume and that comes after she's looked out the window at night and sort of seeing the glow, and you think, oh, okay, well, I'm not prepared to pay this price. And as anti-Semitic as she is represented, she's not prepared to stay in this house a minute longer. She leaves under cover of night or first thing in the morning. But there's also intimations that the children can hear and know what's going on. There's children of various ages in the family. And the two youngest children, there's a young girl, and there's, I think, 3 instances where Höss is walking around the house at night, shutting off the lights, and he just finds the daughter in these strange places in the house in a kind of fetal position, sort of all hunched over. And there's another scene with a little boy playing with these toys in his room, and, you know, essentially someone is shot on the other side of the wall. They're screaming, they're shouting, there's a shot, and he walks over to the window and kind of looks out, and he can't see anything, but then he just says, "You won't do that again," because he's kind of playing with his toys, but he starts, you realize that he can hear what's happening and that it's becoming part of his play. So I think there's lots of sophisticated layers to the way that they've thought about dialogue and sound, and who can hear and who can't hear, and who's listening, who's not. And you talked about kind of where things go into an abstract, completely different, by very, very sharp contrast, abstract in the way that they're shot and edited, abstract in the use of music. And there is music at the start and music at the end. I didn't find confirmation of this, but most of the music sounds to me like it's vocal in origin, but heavily electronically distorted. There is music at the start. There's a black screen and just a musical score that crossfades into a scene by the river with all of the sounds that entails. And there's a sound for the closing credits. I'd be very interested to know, the people who've seen the film, what you thought of the music. The music at the start, I thought, oh, okay, this is kind of like just preparing me for something quite unusual and different. I really didn't find very edifying the music in the final credits, because I had just had a very intense experience. And then I was overwhelmed with a quite cerebral score. It's not that I wanted a romantic or like an easy listening score. I'm just saying that I found myself instantly, I would rather the credits had rolled in silence or to more sound alone. I understand that a lot more score was written that was all taken out as part of the filmmaking process. So that's kind of my one critique, is the use of film, actually, the use of music, I found more distracting actually than anything. I think in those scenes in the film, it's there deliberately to abstract you, to pull you out, to put you into another way of seeing and experiencing. But yeah, the ones at the start and the end. So very interested to hear like non-specialist feelings about that. We've seen it.
Thank you very much. I think we can. Our panelists. I'm going to open to see if there are any questions in the room and on Zoom. I have questions, but yes, we have David. So wait a minute, David. I will make you a sign when you can speak. Yes.
So you want me to speak now, okay? Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for all your thoughts. So Emily mentioned, if I understood her correctly, the contrast of nature and industrialized killing. And I wonder if we can say more on this, and actually do so in a way that brings us to Josh's point about climate crisis. Something that really struck me was how the love of nature is depicted in the film. So Rudolf Höss is kind of appreciating this kind of beautiful landscape in the opening scene, and his kind of love of horses and dogs and wild birds, and his wife's pride in their garden. But this is kind of set in dialogue, it seemed to me, with this kind of destruction and pollution of nature, the kind of the ash and the bones in the river, and the ash kind of explicitly mixed into their garden soil. And I mean, I took this as a kind of a prompt to interrogate how kind of our own romanticizing of natural landscapes and animals involves a kind of a controlling and human-centric view of nature. And can seemingly be kind of coexist with destruction of the natural world. That kind of brings us to Josh's point about climate change. So I just wondered if the panel could say a little bit more about what's going on in terms of environment and nature in it, because there seemed to be a kind of enough of it to me that it seemed to be kind of explicit and intentional in the filmmaking.
Thank you very much. Emily, do you want to?
Do you want to ask Josh?
Or Josh, do you want to come in? Okay, wait.
Oh, I actually not sure that I thought you put it so beautifully, David. Yeah, I would just add to that. I mean, I saw it roughly that way, and you know, she's trying to build a garden, which is, you know, an Edenic metaphor. I mean, it literally is this beautiful garden with these wonderful flowers and so on. And, you know, of course, we can't escape not only that it's fed by kind of human ash, but these towers of smoke, like chugging, and these sort of terrifyingly apocalyptic night times with the glow and the sort of, you know, like Mordor or something, you know, again, kind of horror language, because it is horrifying. And the moment when he's, you know, they're bathing in the idyllic river, and then he discovers human remains or something, and tells the kids to get out. I mean, you know, you could see him as sort of an eco-fascist, you know, animal loving, you know, which is a thing. But you could also see him as all of us, which is we don't, you know, we're in denial about that, you know, we love nature and yet we do this other stuff. So you know, we're both those things at once. So yeah, no, I would just say that, really. I think it's, yeah, I agree with you. It seems very aware of itself as a motif. Yeah.
Cool.
I also don't have loads more to add to that, and also to the second Josh's kind of thought that question, that comment was really beautiful.
Louder.
Sorry. I don't have much more to say to that, really. But I was just thinking, as Josh was talking, that I was reading a review of the film today, which spoke about how sickly the film was, and thinking about the color of nature and the kind of animacy of the sounds of nature that I was speaking a little bit about at the start. I was thinking that it is quite sickly, the saturation of you know, the greens and the blues, and you know, that moment with the flower and the reds. It does seem as though these two things are inextricably linked: the industrialized murder of Jews in the camp and the tarnishing of nature. This isn't a complete thought at all, but I've been thinking a lot about the presence of animals in the film. I think particularly inside the house, the family, I don't know actually if it is a family, I think it is a family dog, is in almost every shot. And I've been thinking a lot about the significance of that, what that might mean. I don't have answers, so if anyone else does,
there were lots of comments from people about the dog, feeling threatened by the dog. Thinking, well, anyway.
It's Sandra Hüller's dog. The lead actress of the dog, and that's why
really?
the dog was so comfortable.
Okay, we have a question in the chat from. Although it's.
If I make a comment to that, because I was going to ask the question.
Yes.
About the garden. As a gardener myself, I found it incredible that she was taking credit for everything that was in the garden. Yes, they had gardeners and so on, but you need to remember that that was actually probably the commandant's garden before the Hösses moved in. So that puts an interesting complexion on her pride.
Thank you. I'll take Graham Cole question in the chat, who says, I'll read it from here. Is there a power in this film with regard to what we do not see and not hear? And although there is no smell-o-vision, what we do not smell, that all keeps the viewer away from what is going on in the camp, and as such is a key character in the film. Does anyone want to add to that?
I mean, I actually had the one thing I didn't talk about that I had written down was that there's an intimacy of sound. We feel vibrations, they enter our ear. There's something very intimate about sound. that is not true for vision. You can close your eyes and it goes away, right? But smell is the other thing that sort of penetrates our body. And obviously, there have been experiments in smell-o-vision, and thankfully this is not one of them, but it did occur to me, I thought, oh, well, that's actually the one sense that you don't have that would really have an impact on that, on film, would be the sense of smell. And what that would do to us, that would be quite incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there a question in the audience here before I go back to Zoom? Yeah. Yeah.
I'll follow up to the final comments, and that was about the bracketing music. Like you, I found that upsetting because I thought I was being manipulated. And I thought it was inappropriate to the film, and I think it's still good. They could have left it out. I would like to find out, my only explanation for it as a watcher of many films was he didn't quite know how to begin it or end it. And this was just a technique for coping with the situation.
I mean, the opening black screen and the music, it was like an overture, actually, which is also a kind of a strange thing for this film.
Use its voice.
And yeah, well, and the composer Michele is a long-time collaborator, so who's done wonderful scores for previous films. There was also something a little bit, because it was the human voice that had been modified, degraded, manipulated. There's just something also to me was very obvious about that, about the kind of you never got a clean voice. The voice was always distorted by something. And I just thought that a bit obvious. It's sort of a bit, yeah, it was.
I didn't know it was distorted, but as a core word, it's pretty difficult to see.
Exactly. And so yes, how to start it? I mean, you could have just started it on the riverbank, and similarly, I think it does kind of end. Like it ends with that interruption into the present day. With the workers cleaning the camp tourist site, and then cutting back to him on the stairwell, and just going to credits would have been, completely fine for me. But those are the only choices that I don't agree with, or I don't understand. Interesting that you felt so.
Yeah. Josh, did you want to reply?
Sure. Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah. I didn't mind the music. Perhaps that's not quite the right term, but I think there were quite a few things that sort of jarred for me in the film, and I sort of felt like I'm going to trust Jonathan Glazer, who, if nothing else in his other films as well, seems to, err on the side of let's do something that might not work, because it might make the film stay with you for years and years, and things that are smooth or kind of work, maybe ultimately don't. So I sort of, but I just didn't bug me as much, I think. But I was just thinking a lot recently about this film and some other films that, it'd be great to think of a third example, but I can think of two that really use sound, as you say, this thing that penetrates you whether you like it or not. You can try and disavow it, you can try and deny, you can shut your ears to it or think about something else, but you can't sort of avoid it completely, as a kind of metaphor for our times, in which so clearly we're all now in the era of the internet, suffused with the knowledge of doom and destruction that's constantly there, and so in a way we need to shut out more. But there's a film called Memoria. Did anyone see Memoria? It's a really excellent film, and in it Tilda Swinton plays a woman who randomly gets plagued by a weird, like, clunking boom noise that nobody else can hear, and it sort of becomes apparent it can't be reduced to some sort of hearing problem, and it's obviously a kind of metaphorical thing of hearing all the things that we spend so long trying not to hear. It's like this sort of knock of mystery or history or something, or otherness or guilt or something, and it does a huge amount of work, just this thud, and she tries to figure out what it is and so on, and she finds herself being led away from her comfortable white wealthy, urbane, globalized kind of Tilda Swinton life into these hinterlands that are quite that are indigenous and that are quite different in terms of race and place and relationship to land and time and nature, you know, all those things. And these are places that at some level we've destroyed, and we've committed genocides and continue to commit genocides there in these sorts of spaces, as well as ecocide. It's quite an extraordinary film, and it was quite hard for me to feel, A, this is about denial, or sort of the bit where you can no longer deny, perhaps that's a slightly different moment. And also that it was about climate, that it was about, you know, at the level of metaphor, but also very concretely, you know, in terms of climate injustices tend to be found most cuttingly in these zones of indigeneity and sort of people in the jungle, for example, at the forefront of climate cruelty and murder and extractivism. So I just wanted to throw that out there as a slightly different film that I think is dealing with quite similar stuff in a way, and uses sounds. The soundscape is amazing in that film in general. To do it, maybe there are some other obvious ones, but it feels like we're, you know, filmmakers, I guess, as certain artists are looking for ways to not exactly metaphorize, but like enact what it's like to constantly not be able to hear what is urgently screaming at us.
There's also another, there's another moment, another abstract moment in the film where, as Amelia said, the Polish girl who's leaving apples out is shot in military grade X-ray vision. But then there's this very strange sequence where she goes home, and as soon as she goes through her front door, it goes back into color, and she's with her family, and she's picked up a piece of music that's been handwritten, and you figure out that it's a piece of music that's been written by someone inside the camp, by a Jewish person marked for extermination. And at one point she plays it on the piano, but while that's happening, there's a voiceover from the archive of the composer who must have survived and was talking about the piece of music that he'd written. So it's and so there's these layers of historicity happening and abstraction, and we're no longer in the world of. So in terms of risk taking, in terms of what Josh was saying, there are still plenty of, you know, quite risky things happening even just around that involve music and sound, because the little girl can't hear this archival voice. You take a minute to kind of figure out, oh, okay, the voice is non-diegetic and is seemingly unrelated, but was completely related. You have to do a bit of work to kind of figure out what's going on. But at the same time, enriches what's happening on either side of it.
Thank you. Joe, thank you for your patience. I will first read the question of Sue Weiss, and then I will get to you. So thanks everyone for your excellent comments. What do you think about the particular focus on Hedwig versus her husband, who is after all the commandant? Is she presented as more blameworthy for some reason, or closer to us as viewers? Who wants to reply?
I have so many thoughts about that, but I've said quite enough, so I can come back for a bit.
I mean,
Yeah,
she's certainly, I mean, she feels closer to us as viewers, but she's also closer to the victims, right? We see very early on her put on the coat of the victim and put on the lipstick. So instantly she's marked as a person who's in much more, you know, uncomfortably intimate proximity with victims. She's the one who's kind of orchestrating to the people in the house also, you know, let me know what you want. We can, you know, when it comes to dispossess items of victims. Also, she's the only one who, well, between her and Rudolf, she's the only one who explicitly talks in kind of violent terms about what's going on around them when she threatens one of the house workers to turn her into ash. She also calls it, you know, she's quite prideful. Obviously, she's very prideful of her role, but she rejoices in the fact she has this term Queen of Auschwitz. Is that what she calls herself? Yeah. Okay, I think so. So yeah, it's really interesting. She's a really interesting foil of her husband. And what I would say also though is that I mean, it gives us a really interesting gender dynamic. And yes, it is Rudolf who is the commandant. But on like a on a, I don't know, an experiential level to talk about, you mentioned the film about the Wannsee conference, conspiracy. It's the viewing experience of watching a film like that is supposed to only deal with the banality of the evil is kind of, I don't want to say boring, it's not boring, but it's difficult to watch. And so it is also interesting to have this character that's got a bit more substance to her. And yeah.
She's the one who definitely articulates their worldview as when it comes to film much more clearly and deliberately than Rudolf does. Is a lot more implicit. And so for that reason, because she is more articulate, she bears the brunt of, she carries the moral weight of the film. Because I think she really is the one that, in a sense, embodies some of the values that the film wants us to reflect upon when we think in terms of like, it would be nice to have a nice house with a nice garden, it's covered with all the things that you know, the choices we make and the people who will never be able to get access to them and so on. Another thing that is interesting is that there's in the films about the Holocaust, there is also a really kind of the wives of the Nazi officers. One that watching the film, it struck me how different she was from the miniseries Holocaust, where there's I remember the name of was it Dorf, the almost Eichmann-like SS officer, whose wife is the one who eggs him on. She really spurs into, and she's almost like a Lady Macbeth in a sense. She I think is different. She follows different dynamics. She's a lot more, again, petit bourgeois, and so yeah, there's a much more interesting gender dynamic division of labor and roles in terms of who has the power to speak about what are we as a couple in the case. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Good.
I mean, I think it's patriarchal, and they have different zones of interest. Like she's in charge of the home, and he's in charge of bringing in the money that makes that possible. And like a lot of what is familiar about a relationship where the man has the status and the all the rest of it, and the woman is but also has not control, but like has real say, has real power in the relationship, because she does have power in the relationship, and she exerts that. Right? And that's why when he says we've got to move, she's just like, you can move, I'm not moving. And there's such a chilling, and it's also, I mean, I don't want to say this, but you almost feel sorry for him, because it's like he kind of just wants to be with his family. He might be a mass murdering, you know, desk murderer, I think that's the phrase. And she's the one who throws Nazi party line back in his face. This is our Lebensraum. This is our, you know, and it's quite astonishing what she's willing to. But anyway, I think it's about zones of interest. I think that's kind of like possibly why the title is how it is.
Josh, do you want to say something? Make a sign? No. Okay. Thank you. Joe Petit, thank you for your patience. Do you want to ask your question?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. First of all, I think this might be the first panel I've ever been to where everyone agrees that they like a film, which I think is quite revolutionary. So thank you for that. Thank you also for a really interesting panel discussion. I've really enjoyed it. My question might be a bit of an unfair one. I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with the book, but my question is, where on earth is Martin Amis? Because listen, I'm not one for sort of fidelity to the book when it comes to adaptations, but the film is so far removed from the book. It is described as a loose adaptation of the Martin Amis. But in the book, the Höss character is sexually inadequate. He's totally inept. He's overruled by people who are inferior to him in the ranking order. He's a drunk. His wife is more or less having an affair. So he's quite a buffoonish character in the book, actually. And this is so far removed from that. I think the only scene where there's a sort of similarity is the final scene in the theatre, when he imagines gassing the Aryan people away from the camp. And I think that's the only point where I could really see the connection. So I'm genuinely throwing this out to the room because I'm wondering why use the title The Zone of Interest. And actually, Drew, you went some way to answering this just now. Why draw on that as an intertext, but do something so radically different? I'm just wondering what the purpose of employing Amos here was. I don't know whether any of you are familiar with the book, and apologies if you're not, but it's an open question in my mind that I'm really trying to fathom. So any thoughts would be very much appreciated.
Josh.
Yes. This is going to sound like maybe slightly facetious, particularly because I haven't read the book, which I now feel bad about. But I did feel that way you were telling me what Martin Amos's version of Höss is. It sounded a lot like a typical Martin Amos character, drunken, buffoonish shagger who can't get enough and whose wife is cheating on him. So maybe, that might be one reason why you might not want to cleave quite so, to find your own version of it. And the other thing I'd say very briefly is just as a filmmaker, it's really, really hard to make films. And if you want to, you try to find as many ways as you can to make it easy. And one of the ways that will make it easy for you is there's a book. And it's very hard to get finance for a film if there isn't some kind of underlying IP, intellectual property, that you can kind of base it on. So again, it might well have been a book that, Jonathan Glazer found terribly moving and interesting. I don't know. But I know for Under the Skin and for his other films, he seems to have just shredded the books and just done whatever the hell he wanted. And I often wonder whether that's because it's just a lot easier to sit down in front of the BFI and say, I really want you to fund my film. It's based on a Martin Amos book, what could go wrong? So I don't know. I just throw those things.
That's really interesting because I share your view that this is an incredible film, but the book is not an incredible book. It's an average book as an average portrayal. So I mean, albeit for me, but it just it's interesting that cynical view might be the right one. I don't know.
It might be, yeah. Also, bad books tend to make better films. Good books make better films generally because that's they should stay prose or whatever. But yeah, thanks.
Oh.
Yes, start again. Sorry.
So I just, in light of that exchange, there were two clues. One is, yes, it's loosely based. Apparently, Glazer got a free publication copy of the book and tried to option it then. But then goes on to say that, well, I knew I wanted to make a Holocaust film. I knew I wanted sound. You would hear but never see it, but I didn't know what to put on in front of the camera. So he bought the property and he was still trying to figure out how to make a movie. So that kind of maybe reinforces Josh's kind of idea that it was it is all about the funding and all the rest of it.
Yeah. Before I go to more Zoom questions, are there any questions here in Lecture Theatre B? No, okay. So there was a question that I also had about. So from Kate Ferris Swenson about the vomiting of Höss, or the seemingly vomiting of Höss at the end. So the question is, does it make him more human? Does it rehabilitate him a little bit? Because you all discussed the fact that, okay, there are no close-ups and all the cinematic and sound effects create a distance in a way. What do you think? What do you make of this last scene? Or not last, but almost. Anyone?
I agree that it does humanize him to an extent that you realize that that the body doesn't lie, if you like, right? But it doesn't absolve him of anything at all. Like, it doesn't make you like him or forgive him or anything like that. You just kind of think, because he just sort of straightens his jacket and walks on, kind of thing, and yeah.
I have a theory about that.
Okay, go for it.
And before that, he went military medical inspection.
Yeah.
But we don't know that. It could have been just a regular inspection as part of duty. But there must have been something wrong. And it could have been something like a geological answer. I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether we know about his medical history.
But the question is then why show it? So
Yeah. Emiliano?
But why should medical?
Oh, sorry.
Can I just comment on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think actually it's
Loud.
I think it's a very important point to make them human. I mean, they are you and I. That is exactly the banality. They're just what used to be called in German stinknormal. They're completely normal, mediocre human beings with all the social, aspirations that we all have. And I wanted to say so actually all the more jarring it is that they're all human. They are so simply and banally human. But I wanted to say something about the zone of interests, actually, or the zone of interest or interests. I don't remember, is it plural or singular? It's singular. They all need for all of them to be happy, for all of them to be proud, or for each character to be either happy or proud or content or successful professionally or successful in going to the Nazi image. They each have a zone of interest. So the woman who said, wife, who says to her husband, yeah, you go, you do your career, you need to do your career. I need my perfect life and my perfect garden. I need the camp, I need the ashes, I need that, death industry in order to have my perfect bourgeois life. I cannot have it in Germany. We were poor there. Here, we can be successful bourgeoisie, So I think maybe something, which also applies to us, by the way, nowadays.
Thank you. Any more comments on the vomiting? Oh, there are more. Okay, you need to shout. Ben first.
Thanks. My reading of that particular scene was slightly coloured by the fact that I had read Hesse's diary, and it's a very unsettling book because by that point the Nazis have lost and he's confronted by the fact that he's about to be executed. And the whole book, he never denies what he's done at any point. It's essentially him, whether it was to the world or himself at that point, I'm not quite sure, but it's about him rationalizing what he did, how he thought at the time it was right. And I think it's interesting that to an extent it is shown in the film when he's at Auschwitz before he goes to Oranienburg. It's a very sort of stoic performance that could have really been done by anyone. It's a very sort of just blank template. He is a human being. This is what he did here. In Oranienburg, the only time he ever shows any emotion in that performance, I forget the actor's name, is when he's listening to the orchestra and he interacts with that woman in the dog. It's the only time you see him smile. And then completely after that, when he knows he's going back to Auschwitz, the character, or the human being rather, should have been quite happy at that. But then it goes back to that blank sort of, I know what I have to do. And at that point, I think I don't know how much of an influence the diary would have had over the film, but at that point, I think it's the acknowledgement that he's rationalizing it to him again. He's realized like he knows what he's doing and he knows what he's doing is wrong, but like you said, he has that moment where he pulls the jacket over and that's how it ends.
Thank you.
Can I just kind of,
Yeah.
I completely agree. I think that's it's sort of that scene humanizes the scene, but that's not something. If anything, shows that if you think about the variety of people, Eichmann, the way he presents himself, was like completely grey, completely unaware, morally, no more imagination whatsoever. Here it shows that there was awareness, and I agree that more than Martinez's novel is the Rudolf Höss's on Auschwitz that is an influence. And so yeah, absolutely, that scene is key because it shows the awareness that the body kind of shows rather than this pressure.
Yeah. Did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read the book, but it just seems to be a literary thing, sort of metaphorical. In some way, he needed to be punished in some way, and whether or not he's punishing himself, whether he's conscious of it, or if we're sort of to believe that the camp is hell, then possibly he's being punished by a god of some type.
Yeah.
But he needed to be punished.
So
Thank you.
he glimpses the future. He looks down the hallway,
Yes.
and that's when we cut to
Yeah.
the present day in the camp now. And so again, this is another risky move from the filmmaker, but it is that if there's a moment of like the vomiting even brings on a moment of, oh, is this a somatic response to my my choices? There's that inkling maybe there. I don't know about a desire. I think divine retribution. I'll make you wretch on stairs is pretty.
Yes, literally.
Okay.
But by the metaphor,
Wait. Dominic Williams, did you want to say something on the vomiting?
No, I had another question. Shall I go ahead and ask it? Okay, yeah. Thank you for the discussion, everyone. I think that was great, or it's been great so far, and will continue to be, I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, there's been a number of times when you've talked about people have used the phrase the banality of evil, and I think Emiliano, you said that this is a film that kind of gets away from cliches about Holocaust perpetrators. But I mean, couldn't you argue that the banality of evil is perhaps the ultimate Holocaust cliche? And that I'm wondering if you think, does the film do something to simply make us think about that cliche in a different way, or to rework it, or to challenge it? Or do you think that I mean, Höss was an extremely ideological person, right? He was sentenced for 10 years to prison for carrying out a political murder. If you read the memoirs, or the accounts of his life, there's a lot of his comments about Jews that clearly show he was a pretty full-on anti-Semite. He seemed to be a little bit more sympathetic to Roma and Sinti, although in a really kind of racist way as well. But these kind of elements are not there in the film. And that's one of the ways that it's been criticized, isn't it? So I'm just wondering if you think that does it deal with the question of ideology, or is it that's not something that the film is interested in? And is that the question of banality? Is that the best way to understand what the film is doing, or is there another way of thinking about it? Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Dominic. Who wants to? Emiliano? Loud.
It's a good question. I think the film wants to make the point about the present, and I agree. Höss was staunch anti-Semite. The film is not interested in that because the film was to tell us, to confront the price, the moral price of some kind of aspirations that are part of the daily life or the many. The banality of evil, yeah, because again, the way in which Eichmann presented himself and the way in which Hannah Arendt kind of brought in there, Eichmann's self-defense was about just someone that was just following orders, and again, no understanding of the ramifications of his actions. Here there's again, the scene that we were just discussing was a slightly different direction. I think that the point about anti-Semitism really was not relevant for Glazer, because it wasn't now what he wanted to talk about. And yeah, that's so we miss out on a lot of the actual historical Rudolf Höss and layers of ideology that inform his actions and his worldview.
Thank you. Josh?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I guess exactly. Thank you. Exactly that. And I just sort of maybe to add, like, banality and ideology aren't opposed. Ideologies can be extremely banal, like the Nazi one, and our our everyday lives aren't non-ideological. Like we're also in our own, hopefully slightly less virulent and violent ideologies too. So I'm not sure. But also just to address the anti-Semitism, I mean, I think they are plotting to murder the Hungarians as well as all the other Jews they've already murdered. So I think it's fairly explicit, even though there aren't long scenes of them enunciating, anti-Semitic Nazi ideology. They are enacting the murder of hundreds of thousands of Jews. So Emiliano, he's soft pedaling maybe some of that stuff that may have been said, in ordinary conversation from time to time, in order that it kind of throws it back on us a little bit more. But I think it's sort of undeniably there. I felt it was hard to get away from. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time. There are still 2 questions in the chat that we can answer quickly. So one by Saris. Wait. Oh, is it gone? Why is it? Ah, no, it was to me. Wait. I'm juggling too many computers. So Saris is talking about the hygiene in the film, the fact that there is a lot of cleaning, scrubbing, Höss, bloody boots, gleaming white laundry hanging on the washing line, the families franzing, scrubbing after encountering something disturbing, the Höss washing himself after having sex with the prostitute, and so on. And then the last scene at the end, which shows the cleaners tidying up one of the exhibits in Auschwitz. So what are your opinions on the inclusion of this scene? Do you think it's a comment on so-called dark tourism and how we can't understand the horrors of the camp by visiting the tidied site? Perhaps a suggestion that the Holocaust history we consume is largely sanitized. Lots of questions. I don't know who wants to answer. Josh, I saw you nodding. Do you have anything? No.
Yeah, I mean, I can say something, I guess. Yeah,
wait,
I mean,
wait.
Hi. No, I was just nodding because I was agreeing, and it was very well spotted and put together, all of those points. I hadn't kind of connected them so well and so much, and to bring them to the end when there's more cleaning. I mean, is it a comment on death tourism? I don't know. I mean, I think it possibly that things are a bit too tidied away, but at the same time, he's really good at keeping these moments ambivalent and keeping their duality and their sort of splitness present. Cleaning is an act of care. We clean the house so that our children don't get sick, and that everything looks nice and is pleasant, and that things don't stink, and so on. And this is obviously an essential thing to do, and it's an act of care. And looking after the memorializations, even if they're a little sanitized, is sort of does need doing, right? So I think he keeps that ambivalence all the way through. This weirdly upsettingly humanizing ambivalence. These are people who care about their children and their mothers and all of it, and their animals, and it's like it makes you sick. So yeah, just wanted to agree.
Thank you very much. And sorry, I didn't see. Yeah, I read your question. Last question from Joseph Owen about the class question. I can't read on my computer, sorry.
Do you want me to ask it, Claire?
You'd be interested in, do you want to ask it?
Yeah, no, yeah, it's perhaps something that we've covered, we've kind of touched on it, perhaps on gender and talking about ideology and things, but just interested in any thoughts on the role of class in the film. Just when I saw it, it struck me the way in which the Hosses were depicted. They seemed to me particularly insidious because they were driven by kind of aspirational social mobility and a kind of desire for status and self-preservation. And that's not a particularly profound statement, but I just wondered if there was something interesting to think about how class functions in the film. That's an open question for anyone.
Who wants to reply to that?
Well, they were, you know, low middle class, weren't they? Sorry.
Okay.
Is it you guys? Are you supposed to talk or?
No, I don't know.
But they
Go for
were
it.
obviously sort of petty bourgeois. And, you know, the only way that they could sort of empower themselves, or at least the wife, was in that one place. And she was sort of grabbing that chance, you know, it was sort of really and awful, obviously. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of mileage in the lower middle class, in terms of how bad it can be.
Yeah, Josh.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, Joseph? I mean, more insidious, but also kind of less insidious, because just an everyman, you know, every family. I guess what I didn't think of this during the film, but as you say it, I'm just thinking of, I don't know, Donald Trump, or, you know, right-wing politicians who make promises to a kind of lumpen, you know, proletariat, but also to a middle class, a petit bourgeois class that you know, that could go this way very easily, and does go this way, and we should all feel implicated. So I thought it was just, again, very well chosen and depicted and sort of honest. You know, you've got to get ahead, you got to get the house, you got to get the kids into schools, and, you know, we're all doing it, right? It's just like yeah. Thanks.
Was there another question in the floor? Okay, last question.
Yeah, I'll continue for a question.
Please.
Sure.
Okay, it was wonderful. It was so interesting to listen to you four. So thank you so much. A last round of applause for Have a lovely evening in Zoom, and see you soon. Bye bye.